Hi, this module in the oil spill response series is about in situ burning. In situ burning is basically burning the oil before it has an opportunity to spread out too much, or capturing oil and concentrating it so that we can burn it and effectively destroy it. In the case of the Deepwater Horizon incident, in situ burning was one of the largest and most successful techniques for getting rid of a lot of oil that was accumulating on the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. The whole idea of in situ burning is that it can quickly take care of a lot of oil, large quantities of oil. Burning may be the only effective means for getting rid of that oil. There are established types of equipment that can be used to initiate the burns. We have some special boom that's called fire boom. There's pyro boom and some other brands as well that make a effective way to accumulate the oil and last through several burns ideally. The advantages and disadvantages of in situ burning. First, it can remove the large quantities I was talking about, but a disadvantage is that it's hard to get ignition on an oil layer that's too thin or has become too emulsified, too mixed with the water. Another advantage is it can lessen the recovery time. It makes it a whole lot easier to get rid of the oil by burning it off than to spend days and weeks chasing the oil down and trying to capture it. Disadvantage, it creates a lot of smoke and soot. During the Deepwater Horizon incident, when the spill occurred 40 miles offshore, the closest hotels were over 100 miles from the spill site. Now, when we had that kind of a situation going on, we could set up a burn zone that was outside of the area right around the rig where they could capture the oil and put it back to a barge and take it to a refinery. But as it started to go towards shore, we could take that oil, capture it in a large U-boom formation out in the Gulf, get it in a thick enough layer that would actually sustain burning and set it on fire. The idea being that we would do that far enough from shore that that smoke and soot would not be drifting on people that were enjoying themselves on the beaches. An advantage is that once you get that ignition started, it's probably going to keep burning, but it takes a little bit to get it started. The water underneath the oil actually is cooling that oil, keeping it from burning. Many times oil that's burnable, if it's hot enough, actually needs to have an initiator. It needs to have some diesel fuel in a milk bottle put out there first to get the stuff burning, to get it started. There are some safety risks with all of that, of course. Advantage, it can be used in almost any water environment. The truth is, we usually only use it in offshore marine settings. It's not real popular to set oil on fire if it's floating down a river. We don't use it very much in estuarine settings unless there are some very sensitive resources that need to be protected, and burning is the only way to do that. A problem, a disadvantage is that if you burn off the lighter fraction of the oil, the part that keeps it afloat on top of the water, the residue might be a tar. Might be a tar that can sink. Oil like this still has some volatiles in it, and that's probably a little lighter than water, so this is probably going to float on water. But if this were to set out in weather for a while, it might vary, and we would burn off all the lighter fractions of the oil that's still contained in here, then this may very well sink. Another advantage of in situ burning is that you can do it at night. Yeah, you can see the fire at night. You need to have the oil accumulated before you start doing that. You can't really find the oil at night quite as well. But you do want to make sure that you operate in situ burn safely, keeping boats out of the way, keeping people out of downwind smoke, and that kind of thing. In order to get the ignition started, getting the fire burning, you need to have something that you can start with. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, a jug of milk jug full of diesel fuel, shot with a flare gun, can sometimes provide that kind of thing. There are also systems where you can ignite from a helicopter by dragging the fire into the spill. You can use a gelled fuel as well, and there are other creative systems. The simplest and most effective thing that was used during deep water was a flare duct taped to a milk jug filled with diesel fuel and putting that onto the fire, onto the oil, so that it would catch fire. Some of the other things you have to consider, some of the other conditions you might have to consider is wind. If there's too much wind, the fire won't be sustained. If there's too much chop on the water as a result of the wind, the oil can't be contained as well. Usually anything greater than about 3 feet will be a problem. Wind shifting directions, that can be a problem if you have everybody working in one area and all the boats are in that area, and then the wind shifts direction and starts bringing the smoke toward you. That could be a problem. You can initiate burns ideally from an upwind location, but you can sometimes do it from a downwind location from where the oil is collected, but that's somewhat hazardous to the workers. And in those kind of situations, you want to use a delayed ignition system of sorts, giving the people that are doing the ignition time to get out of the downwind location. Here we can see a image of how to effect the burning. What you can see here is that a U-boom formation is developed here, collecting the oil in a thicker layer back here in the back of the boom as these vessels are moving forward to the top left here, and it can be ignited with the Healy torch or with a igniter that's floated into the U-boom. Keep in mind this boom is a fire-resistant boom designed to be able to handle multiple burns over time. Here we see a photograph from a Lastec that is basically the same kind of thing, looking overhead as these two vessels are towing the U-boom and have collected a nice thick layer of oil between them, and it's been ignited. Just some of the statistics of how well we can do this. The boom length typically is going to be about 3 times the distance between the mouth of the opening, between the mouth of the U. And here you can see total boom length in feet versus the volume of contained oil per inch of oil depth. In the rare cases where we do inland burning or upland burning, it can be used on substrates of vegetation where the oil properties are going to sustain combustion. Typically when that is applied, when we do burning in situations like that, it's on grasses that grow in the estuaries, and what we try to do is burn the tops of the grasses off and the oil off at high tide, so that a blanket of water is covering the roots of those grasses. When that happens, the water will not get so hot that the plants will die, and as soon as the fire is out and the oil is dealt with, the oil is going to wind up being burned off. But in the end, what happens is the roots will sustain new growth, and the area will recolonize very quickly. If we do any inland and upland burning, we want to make sure that we have a means of fire control so that we don't wind up having a fire get out of hand, catching a nearby forest or houses. The the slide says may require regulatory approval. All in situ burning requires regulatory approval. Here we see a controlled burn surrounded by a white fire retardant at a spill site from a pipeline up in Minnesota. This would have been a very careful call by the folks that allowed this to happen. If you'll notice, there's not a whole lot of wind, just a little bit, and they do have fire retardant to control the fire from getting out of hand. If the oil does sink after it's burned, it's going to be more likely that it's going to get into the soil, into burrows, into crab burrows or burrowing animal burrows, into root structures of plants and things like that. We also have to consider the fact that smoke is going to be generated, where that smoke might go. In any case like this, when we're using something like in situ burning, we want to do a net environmental benefit analysis to determine whether or not the burning is going to be overall better for the environment, better for recolonization, or worse, and use those kind of analyses to make our decision on whether or not to use this technique. I appreciate your attention and consideration of this as a technique. It was used quite successfully during Deepwater Horizon, with about 7% of the oil that was spilled being taken care of by in situ burning. Thank you.